Hey again, everybody. Garrett here, and today I'm going to be giving you a psychologist perspective on PTSD. So, first of all, what is PTSD? As the DSM would say, it's an actual threat to injury, witness to trauma, exposure to trauma, sexual violence, or experience of trauma. And it has to be over a month for it to actually be PTSD, because if it's not, then it's a disassociative problem. Because, well, I'll talk about that in just a second. Anyways, for the history of PTSD, originally it was called shell shock in World War One, and that's initially when research for PTSD began. So, through that, it kept going, and it was still called shell shock through World War Two. It's in Vietnam is when PTSD became like huge. It started becoming a huge thing for the military. And why was that? Well, it's not only the fact that they were fighting a near invisible enemy, it's they were fighting a jungle as well. Their buddies were going down left and right. It was a war that they were winning, but they weren't winning at home either. So even if you volunteered, or if you didn't volunteer and you were in the draft and you went over and you fought for something that you didn't believe in or you did believe in, you came home to people that treated you like garbage anyways during the whole peace movement and all that. But anyways, that was when PTSD began being researched by the military a lot more and being understood more as an actual thing that happens through traumatic events. All right. It also has this thing called comorbidity, which comorbidity means it can lead into so many different other things. So, like with PTSD, it's an anxiety disorder, but it can also lead into other anxiety disorders, like panic attacks. Uh, what was it? I guess flight or flight response, amygdala hijacking, uh, frontal cortex hijacking. It leads into so many different things like depression as well, or stomatiform disorders, or dissociative disorders. Now, the root cause this at a biological level is we all have a natural limit to how much our mind can take. Yes, some people have more stress tolerance to other things, but even them are susceptible to a certain amount of point. So there is a little bit you can do to stop this. Like, if you're going into a job, say police work, or you're going into military work, or you're going into emergency work, you expect to see dead bodies. You expect to see these gruesome accidents. And that gives the mind a little bit more thing like resistance because it is a goal that you're working towards. A goal to like do your thing, but it gives you about a 25% more resistance rate than to anybody else that doesn't work in a trauma field. Um, on a biological level, it's literally hijacking the amygdala as well, which is the fear response in your head, or it's a strong remote, like emotion response, basically. And that's when panic attacks happen. That's when flashbacks happen. That's when all these other things happen. And also, on an individual level, it's stressful and often leads to agoraphobia, which agoraphobia is the fear of like leaving a safe space. And you can see it through PTSD because you don't exactly know what will set off PTSD because there are similar things that can happen. Like, let's say somebody was raped in like a club. Well, then they're not going to like crowds. They're not going to like being in anything that is a crowded area. And so, why would you want to leave the comfort of your home when there's so much danger outside? On an interpersonal level, it is very hard watching a person you know suffer from literally living everyday life or not being able to come back to it. It's hard to see that for families. because they want to help them. Of course, you want to help your family, but like, how do you when their entire worldview is shaken up? They don't trust anything, they don't feel like they're safe in their own home. It's hard. Now, for a community level, it's strange for people to see people having an episode. Like, it might scare people, it might leave them questioning, it might make them feel not safe because they themselves, PTSD victims, don't even feel safe. They don't feel like anything matters because they are having an episode in public in reaction to something, but it's hard to explain that to people when you are having that episode. In policy level, we already talked about it, but it was originally known as shell shock and eventually grew into PTSD. Uh, in the DSM-4, it was a little less like figured out, and which, by the way, the DSM is how psychologists criterionize and categorize illnesses and give lists under the illnesses of what could lead up to it. Um, but anyways, there's multiple therapy and support groups now. It is a much understood thing, and it's more common nowadays than not. Like in Detroit, 90% of people will experience a traumatic event, while only 9% of them will get uh, PTSD. But still, that's a high number in a population, and it's quite common in that population. The more trauma you experience, the more likely you are to get PTSD. Now, for the public health solution, there is already one, and it's called exposure therapy or re exposure therapy, more specifically. And that is basically bringing somebody to the event of the problem. So, like, if a soldier experienced something terrible on a battlefield, they will bring the soldier back to that battlefield when he is ready. See, in exposure therapy, there is a buildup to like a certain point. So like here, we'll just be talking about it. Here, we'll be showing pictures of the battlefield. It could be calm or it can be in a war state. It's entirely on the psychologist. And then we can bring sounds of the war thing. And then we, at the top, is when we bring them to the war zone. Now, the target population is anyone within the DSM-5 criteria, which I stated above. It's anybody that, let me pull it up here, is actual threat or injury, witness to trauma, exposure to trauma, sexual violence, and it has to be over a month of the effects happening for PTSD. Now, what levels of the socio-ecological model does this target? It's all of them, because it is a government policy to give people that have experienced PTSD support. And exposure therapy does work. It doesn't sound like it should, but it does. It gives the mind the ability to recuperate and actually take in things and understand things when it couldn't before, because everything was happening so fast and you were in a state of panic. But now that it's in a calm state and you get to have it from a third eye's view, you are able to come to terms with it. And basically, the whole reason that this intervention happens is to stop PTSD, to give people that faith back in the world, to give people their world back, even. But a critique of the intervention is this: it's all up to the psychologist and the patient. So if the psychologist takes it too fast, you will only hurt the patient. If the patient wants to take it too slow, you will only hurt the patient as well. There has to be a balance. And if that balance is disrupted and if it's wrong, it will only cause more harm. All right. Thank you and goodbye.